A new report from the Texas Progressive Policy Institute looks at the Black unemployment crisis and says, hey, this is way bigger than just one statistic. They argue it's actually the first domino in a huge chain reaction that has some really profound consequences. So let's break down what they found.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to get a handle on the core numbers, what's actually going on. Then we'll see how losing a job can create this cascade of other problems. From there, we'll look at the long-term damage to wealth. And finally, we'll dig into the policy solutions the report actually puts on the table. All right, let's jump right into the numbers, because this is the data that really frames this whole conversation.
So, right off the bat, the report points out this really stark contrast. Black Americans make up about 14% of the U.S. population, but they end up carrying a much, much heavier share of the nation's unemployment burden.
And this is where you really see it in black and white. The data shows the unemployment rate for Black workers sitting at 7.8%. For white workers, it's 3.8%. That's more than double. That gap is the absolute core of the problem this report is digging into. This table really puts it all into perspective, doesn't it? Even with a much smaller slice of the total population, you've got 1.8 million Black individuals who are out of work. The report argues that it's this concentration of joblessness inside one community that just amplifies all the damage.
So, how exactly does one statistic blow up into all these other problems? Well, the report calls it a cascade of harms. It's like losing a job is the first domino to fall, and it just triggers this chain reaction that puts the most basic human needs at risk. The report says the impact hits 3 areas right away, and they're the big ones: just getting enough food to eat, keeping a roof over your head, and the massive toll it all takes on your health.
The first domino to fall is often hunger. And get this, the data from 2023 shows that more than a third of Black adults faced food insecurity. That rate is dramatically higher than what we see for white adults.
Okay, the next domino is housing. Think about this for a second. Black renters make up less than a third of all renters in the country. But in 2023, they faced nearly half of all eviction filings. The report draws a straight line from unemployment and income loss right to this housing crisis.
And you've got to remember, this kind of stress isn't just financial. The report points to research that links the constant worry of unemployment and eviction risk directly to severe mental health challenges, especially for Black mothers. It's a health crisis that's born from an economic one.
So these immediate struggles, they don't just vanish into thin air. Let's trace how they can spiral into a cycle of debt that, according to the report, can literally trap families for generations. Now, this is a really crucial point. Losing your job for a bit doesn't just create a temporary problem with paying the bills. The report argues it can cause permanent financial damage, building a wall that blocks you from future opportunities. The report actually breaks this down into a 5-step spiral. So it starts with a job loss. Then that leads to falling behind on payments for something you absolutely need, like your car. The car gets repossessed and boom, your credit score just gets tanked. And suddenly you're locked out of all sorts of opportunities down the road. And that right there is what's really at stake. The report calls it the wealth building ladder. All those essential steps: getting a reliable car to get to a better job, qualifying for a mortgage, accessing credit to start a business. All of that becomes almost impossible to climb once that initial job loss has wrecked your financial foundation. Okay, so that's the problem and its consequences. It's a lot, I know, but the report doesn't just stop there. It shifts gears to focus on solutions, and it proposes this multi-pronged approach to try and break the cycle. So what does the report suggest we actually do about all this? Well, the authors lay out a whole series of specific recommendations. They argue that the only way to really fix this is with targeted action on a few different fronts at the same time. First up, they say we've got to strengthen the social safety net. We're talking about shoring up things like nutrition assistance and housing support. The idea is pretty simple. Provide a cushion to catch families right after a job loss, before they fall into an even deeper crisis. Second, the report goes right after that debt cycle we were just talking about. It calls for much stronger consumer protections, especially for things like car loans, to stop predatory lenders from trapping vulnerable people in high-interest debt right when they're at their lowest point. And finally, the report zeroes in on housing stability with a 2-part approach. For renters, it's about proposing programs to stop evictions before they happen. And to build that long-term wealth, it recommends creating a real pathway to home ownership for first-time Black buyers.
So all these policy ideas are on the table. But how do they actually become reality? Well, the report's conclusion connects all of this to a very direct call for civic action.
The authors are really direct about this. They argue that putting these solutions in place isn't just some technical problem, it's a political one. They say it all depends on who is holding office and whether they're actually accountable to the communities that are being hit the hardest.
And that's why the report ultimately lands on the idea that the most effective tool for change is what they call strategic voter activation. The authors are calling for engagement at every single level of government, from your local city council all the way to Washington, D.C. And that, really, is the core takeaway the report's authors want to leave us with. In their view, the path to solving this economic crisis runs directly through the ballot box. The solution they're proposing isn't just economic, it's fundamentally political. And that brings us to our final thought. This report doesn't frame these unemployment gaps as something that's just inevitable. It frames them as the direct result of policy choices, which leaves us with a really powerful question to chew on. What is the real long-term weight of those choices when they keep getting made and they compound generation after generation?